So you've definitely heard of ChatGPT. It's an AI that can spit out code, make websites, games, take your exams for you, you name it. And 4 months ago I made a physics engine, which was one of the harder things that I have done in life. So I thought, what if ChatGPT makes a physics engine, and then we compare both engines and see which one is better. Okay, to make things fair, ChatGPT will also be subjected to using DirectX and C++, since that is what I used, and also I already made it a base project that allows me to render stuff onto the screen, since that's not really relevant to physics stuff. Now let's begin. What features does a physics engine need? Okay, cool, it gave me like a general list of stuff, so we can use this as a checklist of what our engine needs. So let's begin with rigid bodies, since we can't really do anything else without them. Write me a rigid body class using DirectX 11 and C++, which also uses a gameobject class. And I should just be able to copy and paste it, right? Wrong. Actually, this won't work because you have to include it in other files, integrate it, initialize it, fix any remaining problems with your bad code, all of which is making you go crazy. Only after 10 minutes have it working but not look any different. Okay, so we have rigid bodies, and I asked ChatGPT for some functions that let me move my objects using WASD, and it seems to work. So let's move on. Okay, so one thing I want in this engine is UI. I want some sort of visual indication of what is going on. ChatGPT recommended I use GUI, I'm GUI, I am GUI, so I got that set up pretty quickly. Like, surprisingly, it was super simple. Like, guys, I'm saying, it was really easy and simple. After bombarding ChatGPT with questions, we have this. A little hierarchy menu, object properties, different buttons and sliders, and what does this do, you may ask? Well, it makes the cube long. Yeah. Anyway, here is how it works. Inside of my draw function, I simply create whatever UI element I want, like a button. And then I check if it's being used, and link it to either a function or variable or something else. And bam, it works! One feature that is kind of important in a physics engine is collisions. Now when making my engine, I remember this being extremely annoying. But now I don't even have to think about it. Make me a collision class using bounding boxes. So ChatGPT gave me this class. It's fairly straightforward. We have a bounding box struct that has 3 variables, the center of the cube, the size of the cube, and contact normal, and a few functions to help calculate things. I then asked it for a function to detect collisions, and personally I placed that in a different class called collision handler to make it easy to understand. And finally, I set up a checking system in my update function that will check if any objects collide with one another. So now if a cube enters another cube, we can see this text update, meaning that the collision detection is working. I repeated this process one more time, this time for bounding spheres, which is the same thing apart from the collider is a sphere and not a box. Finally, I asked ChatGPT for some collision resolution. It gave me this class, which checks the direction of the collision and then makes the objects move. So we get this. Now this is actually kind of cool. It's a bit janky, but whatever, like this is sick. I later returned and asked ChatGPT for a collision detection class that has both discrete and continuous collision detection, and replaced that in my update function. So now we can choose whether an object uses continuous or discrete detection, or if not at all. So something I wanted to add to my engine but didn't was constraints, which are essentially rules that must be satisfied during the simulation, such as, basically I wanted one cube to be attached to another cube and pull it. Now I will be honest, this was a dark time of this engine. Not because I don't know anything about constraints, but because stupid ChatGPT went down for like 3 days straight, and when it came back, the history tab was broken, which meant it had no knowledge of the questions I asked, and the questions it answered, which made it basically impossible to fix any issues and to make the previous code it gave me work. So I went and played games for a couple of days and eventually it came back. So here is the join constraint I made. Now visually it looks the same, but one cube can pull another and it kinda works. It's a bit janky, but we'll forget about that. Okay, so I added a bunch of extra stuff throughout this engine, so here it is. And by the way, when I say added, I mean I asked ChatGPT. I firstly added gravity, which is a staple of physics. It's basically just a downward force on an object, and you can either enable or disable it here. I then added thrust, which once again implemented in the rigid body class, and this is actually pretty simple. It adds a force to an object in whatever direction you want, and it's pretty quick. It's much quicker than actually just using WASD to move the object around. I then added friction, which was also fairly simple. It's basically just a variable inside the rigid body class, And I then apply the friction float to the force of the object. And in the engine you can select how much friction you want and make the object either slower or faster. I also made the option to either use force or acceleration. So now force is the default movement that we've seen, and acceleration is where the object can build up momentum when you move it. Finally, I added another collision resolution method, which was a bouncy object. So I added a function that can spawn a bunch of objects at once, and they will basically bounce like so. The bouncing will decrease the more they hit the object until they come to a full stop. And after some time, those objects get deleted. So now with the final verdict. As I said in the beginning of this video, we were going to decide which engine is better, mine or ChatGPT. And honestly, I have to go with the ChatGPT one. But here's the thing, there is no way it would have produced this without me splicing it together. Since it seemed to always miss out on initializing objects and integrating them into the current project, it never created destructors or dealt with garbage collection, and struggled fixing simple errors that it gave me in the first place. I think this engine is primarily better since I've done this once before and now have the knowledge of making one. Do I still think it's worth it though? No.